So I have always had a fear of failure. And I think it's safe to say a lot of people don't like failure. I used to use the typical excuses of, oh, it's because I'm a perfectionist. I'm procrastinating because I work better under pressure. But let's be real. It was the fear of failure. And it wasn't until last year where I truly pinpointed what it was. We have a surprise guest. I was able to identify this fear thanks to the gym. I really had to analyze and face things when my trainer gave me a week of workouts and it was full of exercises that I had never done before. So a little background about me. I have been lifting since 2018, so it'll be about 6 full years in a couple months. So I am not new to the gym, okay? And I've been going to my current gym for a couple of years now. So I'm fully established. I'm considered a regular. I know people, I talk to people, I'm good. But something about me is that I still get anxious when I am trying out a new exercise. Even though I have all this experience now, even though I have all this time under my belt, I still get a little anxious. And usually if I get one new exercise for the whole workout, for the whole week, I'm still okay. I get a little insecure, but I'm able to push through it and figure it out. But a whole week where every single exercise of every single workout is something that I had never done before, that was very overwhelming. And the silliest part was, and I recognized this at the time, was that these weren't super advanced exercises. These weren't like super complicated, advanced movements. I had already seen or heard of all of these exercises. It's just that I had never done them myself. I'd seen them in videos. I've seen my husband do it. I've seen other people at the gym do it. It's just that I had never physically gone through the movements myself. It's really difficult trying to hold my cat up while holding my notes in my hand. She's like got her head draped over my elbow and she's like letting gravity pull me down with her. I really hope the mic isn't picking up too much of her purring. So the first day of this new week, I went over all the exercises with Nico at home the night before, and I thought I was prepared. I went in, I said, I'm gonna do this, we're gonna do this workout together. I was ready to try and tackle it. I really was. But when we got to the gym, we got ourselves set up on the turf area, and one of the gym personal trainers and her client showed up, and they came like right next to us, right next to me. And I got this sense of panic just take over my entire body. I instantly felt like I was being watched. My eyes were darting all over the place from person to person because I felt like I had eyes on me. So I was trying to figure out who was watching me, even though in reality nobody was. If anything, I was drawing more attention to myself because I was visibly panicked and like looking around everywhere. Now, the reasonable and experienced side of me says no one's watching you. No one gives a fuck. They're all too busy worried about themselves. They're all too busy with their own lives, their own workouts. They don't care about you. I know that. But in that moment, it's like all that common sense just left my brain. At most, if someone is watching you at the gym, it's because you're doing an exercise that they don't know about and they want to know what you're doing so that they can try it. Or maybe you're doing a weight or a movement that they're not capable of and they wish they could do it. But the reality is 99% of the people at the gym aren't watching you and don't care what you're doing. But in that moment, my brain was telling me otherwise. My mind told me I wasn't safe, that everybody was watching me, that they were all waiting to see me do the exercise wrong, that they were all waiting to see me fail. That's what was going through my mind. I basically just froze. Now, I knew the solution to my problem was to just force myself to do it, to go through the motions so that it was no longer new to me and that it was no longer scary. So I did manage to force myself to go through the workout. My husband held my hand and babied me a little bit, I admit, but it was what I needed. And I don't remember the exact workout, but I do remember the exercises were still familiar enough where I was able to fumble through it basically. Because again, nothing is super complicated, nothing is super fancy. They were all body weight movements with maybe a kettlebell or a dumbbell. So nothing crazy. Once I started going through the movements for each exercise, of course, everything gets better with repetition. It did become less scary, and I did get a little bit better with each rep. I got through the workout. It was very short, luckily. Day 2, I went over all the exercises again with my husband the night before. We even practiced going through the movements this time. And I thought, okay, I just gotta force myself to go through with it again. I did it yesterday, I can do it again today. So we get to the gym, we set up, and he starts without me. And when he started without me, for some reason, I essentially felt abandoned. And I admit, these are like such ridiculous thoughts. I was thinking to myself, how could he start without me? He knows how nervous I am. He knows how anxious I am about doing all these exercises that I'm not familiar with. And I thought we were going to do every rep together. Well, first of all, in his defense, I did not vocalize this expectation of mine where we were going to do things rep by rep. And of course, he is more physically advanced than I am. He can knock out his reps and his sets a lot faster than me. I just felt left behind, and it just took me by surprise. When he started his workout without me, I started to panic. It was just like the day before, eyes darting everywhere, trying to see who's watching us because surely everybody is watching me, waiting to see me fail. This time, I could not overcome the fear, and I ended up walking away and doing my own thing. I kept telling myself though, okay, when he's done with this exercise, I'm going to go over and join him and just jump in and do the next one. And I'm going to tell him that I want him to wait for me and do it set by set with me. I kept looking over to see what set he was on, to see what exercise he was on. And I was like, okay, the next one I'm going to jump in. The next one I'm going to jump in. No, I couldn't do it. At that point, I had psyched myself out completely. When Nico finished his workout and we went to the car, that's when I finally admitted to him and to myself, honestly, how scared I was over this week of workouts. I ended up breaking down and literally told him, I'm so scared. And just admitting the fact that I was scared actually led to a very small panic attack because vocalizing it made it real. Saying it out loud gave it truth. I don't know if anyone else is like this, but sometimes when I think about something, I can tell myself that it's not true, that it's all in my head if I just keep it in my head, like if I don't vocalize it. So the fact that I just told him, admitted to him and to myself that I was scared, said it out loud, it gave it truth. It now had its own embodiment of existence that I couldn't deny, because when it was still just in my head, I could shove it aside, I could think about something else, pretend it didn't exist. But saying it out loud meant that someone else was going to hear it, and I couldn't just shove it aside and pretend it didn't exist anymore. I don't know if any of that makes sense. Again, I knew what the solution was. It was to force myself to go through the exercise, go through each movement, and create a reference point so that it's not scary anymore. I know that that was the solution. Didn't exactly want to accept that that was the solution, but I knew that's what I had to do. I had seen a clip where Layla Hormozi said, fear comes from your body/mind not having anything to compare the experience to. You have to force yourself to do it so that you now have a reference point and it'll be a little less scary. So while I knew that's what I had to do, it also then led me to think about why I was having such a hard time forcing myself to go through with it. And I then realized my problem wasn't really the fact that this was a new exercise, that I was scared of the exercise, that I was scared of trying something new or anything like that. It's the fact that I was scared of failing. And I think what made it really bad in this situation was that it wasn't just one movement. It wasn't just 2 movements for the whole week. It was every single movement of every single workout for the week, which in my mind compounded the failure. It made the failure seem like a much bigger deal than it actually is. The reasonable side of me said, you're not going to fail at every single exercise. You have enough experience now. You have enough time under your belt where the first 1 or 2 reps might be a little messy, but you'll get it by the third or fourth, and then you'll get it from here on out. That's the reasonable side of me, okay? Then I realized maybe it's because I don't want people to watch me. Maybe it's because I don't want people to see me fail and mess up, because I'm established at my gym now, and established people don't mess up. They know what they're doing. And I realized I was scared of them seeing me mess up and fumble on the first rep. The first rep of the first time of me ever doing these exercises. And looking back, I realize how ridiculous that sounds, and I realize how ridiculous that was of me. But at the time, it seemed like a valid fear. And something that's kind of funny to me is that I was never this petrified when I first started going to the gym, period. When I didn't know how to use some machines, when I didn't know proper form, when I couldn't do heavy weight, I wasn't even this petrified back then. So why am I petrified now, like 6 years in? Well, I guess this was last year, so 5 years in, with time and experience, why am I just now being filled with fear? I've always assumed that my fear of failure stemmed from my Asian culture upbringing. Of course, there's the typical stereotype of what kind of childhood you had if you're Asian, and let's be honest, stereotypes exist for a reason. So it was the typical anything less than an A+ is bad, and mistakes are bad, and perfection was always expected, and even if it is achieved somehow, it's still not good enough. So I just figured that must be where this fear of failure comes from, because that makes sense. But then I saw a post by the holistic psychologist, which I found very interesting, and it made me wonder if there were other sources where this fear could have stemmed from. I'm just going to touch base on this because I do think it strays a little too much from the video as a whole, but the post mentions growing up without a sense of belonging can create a desire to be flawless, perfect, because you believe that's the only way you can be loved or accepted. And I've mentioned, I think at this point, plenty of times where I have always had this desire of finding somewhere where I belong. I do think this also has led to a desire from me personally for praise and acknowledgement. But funny enough, whenever I do get it, I don't believe it for some reason. Like, I always think, oh, they're just trying to be nice, they're just trying to make me feel better, they see that I'm trying, but even though my efforts aren't actually good enough, they're trying to acknowledge it and make me feel like it's good enough, something along those lines. On a surface level, I know that the best way to combat my fear is to accept it and acknowledge that it's a good thing, because failure is how you learn. You learn what your weak points are, you learn what you can improve upon, you learn what you don't know. And through this whole experience, something else I've been able to identify is that all of these things are things that I can see objectively if I'm not the topic. If I am telling someone else, I can give somebody the talk all day, every day, as much as they need it, about how failure is healthy, how failure is a positive thing, how failure leads to growth, and that you should want failure to an extent. But something about applying it to myself, even though I believe all these things, applying it to myself is so much more difficult. So I suppose in the end, I have identified two things through that whole experience: my fear of failure and just how bad it can get, as well as recognizing that while I know the solution, I know the approach to take, it's essentially hard to take your own advice. And I definitely fall in that category. Now that I've identified the problems, I mean, the only thing I can do is work on it, because at the end of the day, you can't work on something you're not fully aware of.